Right, yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm Tim. I'm a alcoholic addict, recovered as well. Always good to hear somebody introduce themselves as recovered. Steve, thank you for that. I'll clear that one. I probably don't need to clear that up in this meeting, but in some meetings you do. The big book is fairly clear right from the very off about what's available to us with this recovery program, and that is to be recovered rather than being left permanently in an abject state of recovering. Well, I believe that recovering is stranded somewhere between steps 2 and 11. But the promises of the book are that I can be recovered, and indeed I am recovered. And today it's 22 years since to the day since my last drink or drug. So I'm very, very grateful to have the opportunity to speak on these steps 11 and 12 today on that anniversary. I've not had a long period of time in my journey where I wasn't really bothered or interested in sobriety dates or celebrations, and I've kind of gone through an arc of then getting very, very concerned about them for quite a long time, and now I've got to a point of measured indifference again in many respects. But one of my sponsors did kind of instill in me the idea that it is worth letting people know because it's an example, and it's a message of hope. And it's testimony of the reality of the situation that I find myself in today with those 22 years of continuous sobriety behind me. Of course, they don't provide me with any guarantee whatsoever of what may happen tomorrow. So, and that's that's really the kind of the lead into the first of the steps that I'm going to talk about in terms of step 11. Because yes, I am recovered. I'm recovered from a hopeless state of body and mind, and that being the physical allergy. That's the easy part, isn't it? Really, if I suffer from a physical allergy, the trick is not to actually physically put any of the substance in, and bingo, I'm fine. Everything's sorted. Only, of course, the problem is that as an alcoholic, an addict, I also suffer from a mental obsession, which is the insane idea that somehow I can drink or use again with impunity. And it's simply, that's in spite of all of the evidence that I might have in front of me. The time comes when I'm unable to call into consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the last, the last spree, the consequences of that spree. One of the mantras that was being bandied around a lot when I first came in was about playing a tape forward, which for this alcoholic is absolutely useless, because number one, I can very often not even find the tape. Number two, the tape is incomplete. And number three, even if I do listen to what's on the tape and happen to have a complete one by accident around me, my alcoholic mind isn't actually going to hear the information that tape is presenting to me, because self-knowledge avails me absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing at all. So recovered. I've got to this position where I'm recovered, but I am not cured of alcoholism. And sometimes this is kind of it's like a missing portion in that balanced equation, I think, between being recovered and not cured. And I think a lot of people mistake the word recovered for cured, and that's what they hear when an alcoholic like me introduces myself as recovered. They think that I'm somehow claiming that I'm cured of alcoholism, and I can never be cured of alcoholism. Again, the book's quite clear that we are like men who have lost our legs. We never grow new ones, or people that have lost our legs, we never grow new ones. It's not, the day will never come, as far as I'm aware, where I'll be able to take a drink, or in my case, any other mood-altering substance, mind-altering substance, without setting off that reaction. The reaction that means that when I drink or use, I drink and or use more than I intended, and when I stop drinking or using, I'm unable to stay stopped. And the big book's pretty clear. It says we are not cured of alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And this is the kind of this is the wonder of the 12-step program, really, where we're presented with a physical and a mental problem, and then we go and seek a spiritual experience in order to deal with that problem. In so doing, of course, we then come across usually a whole load of obstacles to achieving that spiritual experience, because whether or not I was spiritually sick before I activated my alcoholism, I certainly was by the time I crawled into the rooms in 2001 looking for a solution. I'd actually made my first visit to a 12-step fellowship in 1990, when the first installment, the first phase of my drinking and using had come to an end and collapsed in complete financial ruin, homelessness, divorce, and mental breakdown, really, that took me into a 12-step fellowship, where I didn't last very long, because I was convinced that somehow I could still deal with this problem under my own steam. My bizarre solution to my alcoholism at the time was to treat that with street drugs, which then led to drug addiction. And then I spent 11 years bouncing between the dual problems of addiction and alcoholism, trying to manage one with the other. So I became addicted to cocaine and tried to deal with that with cannabis, MDMA, and alcohol. And every time I drank, of course, I set off the allergy and went off on a crazy alcoholic bender. And I had 11 years of trying to do this on my own, failed dismally. I built another empire, took another hostage, another wife, and got myself another home. You know, us alcoholics and addicts tend to be very good at building things really quickly and then tearing them down equally as quickly. And that's what had happened by 2001. And that's when I came in homeless. I had a few possessions in black bin liners, rubbish sacks, and I was unemployed. I was unemployable, and I was slipping into really deeply psychotic thinking, and came in begging to be told what to do. And I'm really, really grateful today that that happened to me, that things got that bad, and that I came and was surrounded by people who worked 12-step program from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm profoundly grateful to those people. I'm profoundly grateful to the people who wrote this book, the pioneers, the first 60 to 100 members of Alcoholics Anonymous who created this book for us. And enormously grateful to the people that made it clear to me that if I wanted to recover, it would be necessary for me to follow the simple suggestions laid out in the book. Very simple, they are indeed. Easy, they most certainly are not. That was my experience. I was able to comprehend what was in front of me quite easily and quite quickly, but to do it with any measure of success was a little bit trickier for me. I am the kind of alcoholic addict that when I stop drinking and or using, things usually get worse in my head rather than better. Some of us are not that way designed. For some of us, we take away the actual substance problem, and the mind clears. And if we can deal with the obsession effectively through the use of the 12 steps, all well and good. In my case, I kind of plummeted fairly quickly into various states of mental and spiritual disorder that needed quite a lot of extensive work and took a fair amount of time. My initial recovery was very fast and quite spectacular. So I'd say the first 2 to 3 years were textbook. But then I did what it talks about in the book around step 11 of started to rest on my laurels. And I worked really a kind of 10 and a half step program, I think, where I got up to 11 and engaged with it half-heartedly and declined virtually any opportunity and had very little enthusiasm whatsoever for working the most significant part of step 12, which for me is working with others. So it's a moot point, really, whether or not I'd actually had the spiritual experience which is described. And I think I could probably go as far as to say, to be completely honest, that the first phase of my recovery was actually still run largely on self-will, was effectively a dry drunk experience, but shored up with some major elements of the 12-step program, but it was not complete by any shape or form. And so I've had two phases in my 22 years. I've had the first phase where things went great in the material world, because I'd stopped drinking, I'd stopped taking drugs, I'd stopped smelling, I'd stopped stealing, I stopped, soiling myself, I became employable again. An awful lot of things improved dramatically in if you were to look at me as a physical being, you would think, well, that guy's doing really, really well. But internally, the problem was still very, very bad. And at 10 years, I decided to walk away from any engagement with other alcoholics or addicts, and any attempt to even appear to be presenting to work this program. And so I really was resting on the laurels of the material achievements that I'd made in recovery, and I was owning my own recovery myself as well. I think I thought that it was down to me, not down to a higher power or a God as I understood him, her, it, or them. Any doubt about that, and go to the top of page 47, where it quite clearly directs us to understand that when we speak to you of God, we mean a God of your own understanding, and that this refers to all spiritual expressions in the book. But I was crediting myself with my sobriety, and I pretty much exited straight stage left. I didn't pick up a drink in the following year, but I did pick up every single character defect going, and I made as much of a mess and disaster of my life as I did in that year, as I'd managed to do at times when I was actively drinking and using. I destroyed everything that I'd built up. I lost all of the material possessions. I lost the relationship that I was in. I lost engagement with my blood family. And on top of that, I lost my health. I suffered a life-threatening heart attack in 2012, which was pretty much inexplicable from a physiological point of view. And I remember when they came round in the hospital afterwards to do some interviews with me about lifestyle and so on, what my diet was, exercise, and all this kind of stuff, my weight. None of the indicators added up that I should have had this heart attack. But I knew that there was one indicator which was a major contributing factor to that heart attack, and that was the deep, deep resentment and anger that I felt towards the whole of the world around me. And that was caused by the fact that I wasn't actually treating my condition with the 12 steps. So the sobriety that I'd had really up until that point was the dodging of a bullet variety. And if anybody in this room is experiencing that, living that, or has lived it, I implore you to get it sorted out before it sorts you out. Because that's my experience with the untreated condition, is that it's ruthless. There are friends amongst mine who still think to this day that it might have been better if I had actually picked up a drink at that time, and I wouldn't like to put any money on that, because I think that probably would have been curtains for me. But I found myself at a crossroads where the alternative was either A, to drink, or B, to return to the 12-step fellowships, to pick up this book again, but this time with a degree of humility, and to actually ask once again for help to actually go through it. And my commitment this time, I think it's fair to say that I distinctly remember being on the gurney in the ambulance, being taken to King's Hospital in London, and I was kind of totaling up my life as I was thrashing around on this gurney, thinking, what have I done? What have I done that's noteworthy? What have I got? What has all this come to? And the only thing I really had of any value was the sobriety that I'd had, all the material worldly goods that I had, a big house in London, a partner who was on television in the UK, a status symbol, kind of trophy girlfriend, really, 2 cars on the drive. None of that stuff meant anything. The only thing that really did mean anything was my sobriety. And the biggest regret I was going to take to my grave, in my grandiosity, of course, I assumed that I was going to die the death of the grand tragedian in that ambulance on the way to hospital. The only thing that I had of any merit was my sobriety, and I made a pledge with my higher power that if I survived, I would commit again properly to the program and to all 12 steps, including 11 and 12, not just the process that had got me restored to some, to an appearance of sanity. And I came out of King's Hospital and walked across the road to the Maudsley, a mental health unit hospital opposite, where there was an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I spoke about my experience in that meeting. Somebody asked me to sponsor them in that meeting. And since that day, I have always been working with somebody on the 12 steps, or some bodies on the 12 steps, using the big book as the basic text and the guide. And I've done that without fail for the last 10 years. So the second phase of my recovery has a completely different makeup to the first phase. And the reason for that is my total engagement and commitment to the whole program, and not just selected parts of it. I know we've got some. Yeah, with this, I used to get Townsend Torrens and ferries when I was younger. They're Scandinavian ferries, and they always had this thing called a smorgasbord on it. I was like, oh wow, it's just amazing. As a little kid, I'd go on these ferries, and my eyes would bulge out of my head because there was just the tables groaning with all kinds of different food, and you kind of help yourself to what you want. You had a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of that. You didn't have to eat the whole thing. That's not the 12 steps. The 12 steps are not a pick and mix or smorgasbord. They are all 12, and they are designed and constructed in a way to all interlink with each other, and to guarantee a continuation of the maintenance of the spiritual condition, which is the only defense against the next drink. And if I leave any loopholes in that program, then I am in big trouble. And as I said, the experience that I have had is that I am in trouble whether I drink or not. This is the extraordinary bad news that I learned about my condition, is that with simply stopping drinking or stopping taking drugs is not enough for this alcoholic addict. I have to do the whole thing, and above all else, I have to work on carrying a message. So, so I began reconstructing my 12-step program, and the first jaw-dropping kind of realization was about the actual components of step 11, as talked about in the big book. Step 11 can become, and had done for me, step 11 had become Tai Chi in those first 10 years. I was a student of Tai Chi, and I was very religious about it, and I was very disciplined, and I became an assistant to the teacher of the class, and was helping other people to teach Tai Chi, and was, getting very, very good at this, and thought I was kind of, completely in touch with the Tao and the way, and I was kind of, nothing could really harm me as long as I was studying this particular form of physical meditation. How wrong I was, because step 11 is actually a lot more than that, and there are, mercifully for idiots like me, there are some very, very concise directions and suggestions made in the big book about how to actually engage with step 11. If you're not an egomaniac like me that thinks that he can read the step and just see the words, oh yes, sort through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact with God as I understand him. Oh, okay, I know how to do that. I know how to meditate, and I know how to pray. I'm off. But the big book has got some rather more concise, precise suggestions that it makes for us, and they're broken into 3 parts. When we retire at night is what they kick off with, and there's a series of questions there that I ask myself relentlessly every night, and that's become a solid part of my practice in spite of my resistance. I work at the moment with a sponsor who likes to see what I've written. I don't think that's necessarily a requirement. And it also means that there's a certain amount of filtering, because some of the things that could go into a written review every night would probably get me in jail, rather than anything else. And so I'm a little bit reticent to fire some of that across the internet. But the great thing about those series of questions is that one of the key questions that was asked is, have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? It's a reminder every day for me to make sure that I take any deep resentment or fear or a harm that I may have committed to someone else, I take that to another human being, as well as just to myself and to my God. And we're taught that lesson when we study step 4 in the first place. In step 4 and step 5, it can be very tempting just for me to strike up a relationship with my concept of my higher power and my own mind. And then what happens is that my mind starts masquerading as my higher power, and I just start doing inventory with myself, and I very rarely get out of columns 1 and 2, and I'm very rarely looking at any kind of solution or change of behavior. Really what I'm doing is repeating endlessly every night, it was her and this is what she did, it was them and this is what they did, it was him and this is what he did. It's a fairly useless and very destructive exercise, but one which I became a master of in my first 10 years of recovery. So in step 11 in the big book, it makes it absolutely clear that if there is something that we should speak to somebody about, that we should then do that as soon as possible. It asks me the questions about resentment and about fear. It asks whether I've been kind, whether I've been loving. It also stresses the point that when in the beginning, the first thing that I should do with this review is it should be constructive. We constructively review our day, is what it says. And in the work I do with other people, I do find there's an awful lot of negative and destructive inventory that people can do. It turns into a kind of exercise of self-flagellation or entrail pulling of like, oh, woe is me, look how bad I am, I have sinned, I am not worthy. And really that's not constructive. We constructively review our day, and at the end of the review we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. And we also make sure that we don't slip into morbid thinking. Way too often I can have the tendency, unguided, to destructively review my day, chastise myself, slip back into fear because I think that my conduct is somehow going to jeopardize the slender hope of sobriety that I'm clinging to, and then morbidly close my eyes and reflect on it in a kind of doom-laden sense. It's absolutely no good at all. Absolutely no good at all. And one of the key questions asked is about whether or not I've packed anything into the stream of life, and whether I was thinking of others and what I've done. And I make a habit these days of listing the things that I have actually done for other people in order to give myself a break from my mind. The core of my condition, the core of my alcoholism is centered in my mind. Now, and it's fundamentally flawed over the question of drink and drugs. It lies to me and it tells me a truth that does not exist. My mind is fundamentally flawed in all kinds of other areas as well. And so for me, step 11 is a way in which to connect with the divinity, the quiet inner voice that I can hear, and that resides within me and within all of you, and in my belief system, within every sentient being. If I can connect with that wider consciousness and circumvent the toxic thinking of my mind, I have a much, much better chance of living a decent life day by day, and most importantly, through that connection to the divine, of being protected when the insane idea that I can drink or use comes around again, which it will and does. I mean, I'm of the opinion that my connection with my higher power is rather like malware seeking software or antivirus software that's constantly dealing with threats to my sobriety without me even knowing. That's the thing, because the mental blank spot, the twist that can come and tell me that it's going to be okay to take a drink, can come from absolutely nowhere. That is the terrifying nature of this condition. In the book, in step 11, it then talks about on awakening and the way of setting up our day. And one of the things that I find also gets missed there, I have to find the exact words on it, but it's on awakening. It's before we start. It kind of says on awakening, and then after, by about the second or third line of saying that, it says before we begin. And I think actually, again, quite a lot of us miss the fact that before we begin, we actually need to calm down, because it's no good me just on awakening thinking about my day. You know, because if I do that, I'm gone. So the first thing I do, right, I've got to do this and I've got to see them. I've got to speak to them. That's happened. I've got this to sort out. I've got that to do. I'm gone already. And I've lost the chance of actually gathering my wits about me. So before I begin, I actually make that deep connection, if I possibly can, with my higher power. At least I try. Listen, you know, we are not saints. Now, this is an unfortunate part of the book that's used by an awful lot of people as an excuse for toxic behavior in sobriety. Oh, we're not saints. You know, it's all right, the 13th step. It's all right to carry on stealing. Bit of tax fraud doesn't matter. You know, this day, you know, yeah, so I told him to F off. Well, he deserved it, didn't he? No, we are not saints, but we do actually attempt to make spiritual progress. And it is in the trying the connection, and that's how we get protected. That's what I believe. So at least I try, you know. And then in step 11, during the day, I'm urged to actually pause when agitated rather than react. I'm such a reactive person that I can get myself into situations, adverse situations, with my fellow men and women at the drop of a hat if I do not pause. And it's the same problem that I have with my mind in the morning and at night, is allowing the thinking machine to run the show. That for me is the self-will. It's if I'm obeying my thinking machine, which is a wonderful tool for doing all kinds of practical things. I do a lot of work with computers. The mind is fantastic at troubleshooting and sorting out stuff like that. When my mind becomes philosopher king or self-anointed saint running my day, it's an absolute car crash every time. So thy will, not mine, is the mantra that I need to repeat in step 11. Now, I talked about the true nature of the condition and my understanding of it, and moving on to step 12, that's absolutely vital that I'm able to communicate that to a newcomer. And it's there are some great tips in working with others about working with newcomers. Some of them are a little dated. So, you know, some of the practicalities are kind of orientated into 1930s America, different social structures, different ways of doing things. But the essence of a lot of the spiritual components and the way that emotionally we should deal, if we possibly can, with newcomers is still holds fundamentally true. You know, there are some key lessons that are given to us in that wonderful chapter. First off, I need to make sure that whoever I'm talking to is disturbed enough over the question of their alcoholism that they are prepared to go to the lengths that are required in the big book in order to seek the spiritual experience that is necessary, that has to be of sufficient force to actually dislodge the mental obsession. That's the gig. That's what we're trying to do here with this program of recovery. So I need to make sure that I've made it absolutely clear through my own experience about the true nature of the illness and its component parts. So there's the physicality that I mentioned earlier. You know, no one among us likes to admit that we are bodily and mentally different from our fellows. Now, a lot of the talk, a lot of the time, from me, as much as from other people, will be about the mind, mental stuff, and the illness is indeed centered in the mind. It makes that clear. But what it also makes it clear very early on in the big book is that any description of the illness that leaves out the physical component is incomplete. And it's absolutely deadly to the newcomer who's encountering this solution for the first time, to not communicate that. There is a physical component to this illness that means that as soon as I put anything in, it sets off an allergic, abnormal, different reaction, which means that I have no control over the amount that I'm going to continue to take. It's physical. It's nothing to do with whether or not I've had a bad day or not, nothing to do with whether or not I experienced any trauma as a child, nothing to do with a whole load of other things. Once I put that first one in, I am lost because of the physical component of the condition. It's that bad. You know, and I have years and years and years of evidence of that. The problem is, of course, that in spite of having that information, I still continued to drink and use. because of the mental obsession. The mental obsession being the insane idea that tells me that I can drink or use a mind-altering drug again with impunity, without setting off the allergy. Insane. If I have a peanut allergy, what do? I stop eating peanuts. Job done. I have a similar problem that's threatening to my mental health and to my physical well-being that can get me incarcerated in jail. It can get me incarcerated in a secure mental health unit, and ultimately it can kill me and have me kill others around me. And yet my mind will tell me that it's okay to take another drink. It's insane. And it's that insanity and the physical component that I really need to impart to my fellows when I'm trying to explain to them the nature of the problem as I've experienced it, to see whether or not it resonates with their experience. And the chapter Working with Others is pretty clear about several things. You know, it's no good. I can't badger anybody else into admitting their alcoholism. I can't anoint somebody else an alcoholic. It's not my job. I can't tell anyone in this room whether they are alcoholic or not. That won't help. The only thing that will help is if their experience resonates with my experience, and they can see the patterns in their own drinking and drugging history that tie in with this concept of the two main component parts of the condition, which are the physical allergy and the craving that's set off thereafter, and the mental obsession. In order to deal with that problem, I then have to make it clear to the guy that I'm working with. And I say guy because I work with men. I'm old school, men with men and women with women. It avoids a lot of confusion in terms of or sexual orientation. Even you know, it's being clear that there can be no blurred lines, no emotional problems either with partners or with people that I'm sponsoring. So I tend to sponsor straight men. That's pretty much the way that I roll. And you know, I have to make it clear to them that in order to deal with this mental and physical problem, it's going to be necessary to seek a spiritual solution. And this is the core work in my 12th step. Having had a spiritual experience, and I've already said I think that spiritual experience has to be one that is strong enough to actually shift that mental obsession. So it's a connection with God, because you know the three pertinent ideas make it abundantly clear. A, that I'm alcoholic and I cannot manage my own life. B, that probably no human power could relieve my alcoholism. And I'll deal with the probably on that. You know, if you tell me, Tim, if you go through that door over there, you will probably get killed, I'm not going to go through that door. I'm not interested in going through the door on a probably will get killed. And, you know, the writers of the book hedge a bet there by saying, you know, probably no human power, because at times it can appear that human power and strategies and practical suggestions can actually work. But the time will come when it's only C, that God could and would, if he were sought, that's actually going to work for us. If you know, we have self-diagnosed as real alcoholics, as described in the big book, then we are going to need a spiritual solution. There's no there isn't an alternative in the house within which I'm speaking at the moment. You know, that's it. CBT, no. I mean, it might help a little bit. You know, therapy, yeah, but it might help with the issues that you have in addition to your alcoholism and addiction, but it won't deal with them. You know, not all trauma victims are alcoholics and addicts. You know, but pretty much all alcoholics and addicts have suffered from some kind of trauma. But it's more often than not a result of the life that they have led in active addiction. There are, of course, very, very serious exceptions to that. But once we've become alcoholic, once we've activated that condition inside ourselves, that has to be dealt with first. I don't think there's much evidence that you can treat trauma victims particularly well when if they're in the grip of active alcoholism at the same time. And sometimes I think we end up putting the cart before the horse in this one. It's deal with the condition of alcoholism first, and then you have the opportunity to deal with all the other stuff. I've got 2 or 3 different mental health conditions that I can roll out if I want, diagnosed, that I can roll out as a reason or an excuse for me to drink. Not so. You know, if I engage with my higher power and get that spiritual experience which comes between me and the next drink, I'm then able to go and deal with those other mental health conditions thereafter. Really, really important for me to get that across to people that I work with. It's also, you know, it probably doesn't sound like it, but it's also really important that I don't preach. It's very, very difficult. It's difficult to talk with enthusiasm and passion about a 12-step program and about working with others and how important I think it is without coming across as being preachy. But I assure you that when I'm dealing one-to-one with another alcoholic, I do my level best not to lecture them from any kind of spiritual mountaintop, you know. And I'm very, very, very keen on advocating the spirit of the 12-step recovery program, which is that, you know, it is a God of your own understanding. You know, and that's fairly limitless, you know, and it repeats that. It tells us that in page 47, and it repeats that during the working with others chapter. It makes it abundantly clear that what we have is really a distilled set of workings from a whole range of faiths and denominations of those faiths, and we are not restricted to any individual faith or denomination. That can be difficult for some of us who are in, you know, hardline proselytizing faiths that believe that they are the only path. That is the stuff of temperance movements and precursors, I believe, to the solution that's offered in this book. And this book makes it abundantly clear that the 12-step program is available to any person who is prepared to accept that there could be a power greater than themselves, and that if they access that power, then they can and will be able to stay sober, free from active addiction a day at a time. Now, once I've kind of sandblasted my new guy with the bad news about step 1, mercifully, there's then, you know, a lot of hope. There's an awful lot of hope. There's some hard work that has to be done, and you know, these days we've kind of evolved from. You know, the 12-step has evolved from where it was back in the 30s and 40s. I'm a member of 2 12-step fellowships, and it's a straightforward task for me to be able to go to those fellowships and find someone who I can then take through the work. You know, there are groups such as this one online where it becomes it's actually people turn up, and they can be provided with someone who can actually sponsor them through the work as it's set out in the book. You know, these are fantastic God-given opportunities. And, you know, in the book, it will talk about you can, you know, once you've actually acknowledged or conceded your innermost self that you are alcoholic and that you cannot manage your own life, you know, and that's it, and that you are bodily and mentally different from your fellows, and you'll never be able to drink or use again successfully. Once you've come to believe that there is a solution, once you make the decision to actually pursue that solution in step 3 and turn your will and your life, which to me is your thoughts and your actions, over to the care of God as you understand him, her, it, or them, then you set about the work of inventory. And part of my work as a 12-step sponsor is to show people how I did my inventory, and to help with that, because there are some traps in there. You know, it's so easy to get stuck in columns 1 and 2. And when, you know, many an alcoholic addict is lost between step 3 and step 4, you know, and we lose them again between 4 and 5 because the illusion, the idea that somehow this information that's been put down in the inventory will be so toxic it can't be shared with another person. I believe it's my job in working with another individual to give them the faith and the confidence to know that they can, if they so choose, share that information with me, and that it will be okay. It will be okay to do that. We then lose loads of people around step 9 as well. You know, when it actually comes into the hard yards, everybody's willing to do everything, and we can say all the prayers and we can do all the writing, but when it actually comes to going out into the world and not just mumbling a half-arsed sorry to everybody out there, but actually rebuilding bridges and trying to reconstruct from terrible damage that we've usually created and caused as active alcoholic addicts, a lot of people just don't bother. And that can be absolutely fatal. And then, of course, in terms of the growth and maintenance step, there's sometimes a debate about that. They're growth steps. No, they're maintenance steps. No, they're growth steps. No, they're maintenance steps. Well, they're both. You can't really grow with, and they're described as both in the book. You can't grow without maintaining anything in the recovery, in my recovery experience, and you certainly can't maintain anything without it growing either. So it doesn't really matter. But 10, 11, and 12, the living part of the program where we re-experience and rework all of the steps again, right the way back to step 4. And if the wheels fall off, we then have to go back to 3. And if they fall off even more than that, then 2. Hopefully never back to step 1, because if there's a problem with step 1, I am going to drink. And hopefully I've done my work in my 12th step well enough to communicate to the new guy that step 1 has to be 100%. You know, it's the only one. But then in 10, 11, and 12, I get the opportunity to rework and stay in my 12-step program. And in step 12 in particular, I get to practice the principles of the 12-step program in all my affairs. Again, we are not saints. I'm only going to do that to the best of my ability. Part of the way that I'm going to do that is by working with someone else. It's very, very difficult for me to suggest to another person that they do things that I'm not doing. You know, that kind of hypocrisy really doesn't sit with me very well in sobriety. So the practice of being able to talk to another alcoholic addict and encourage them to live by the set of spiritual principles that are really set out in the 12-step program, you know, honesty, hope, faith, courage, trust, love. These are things that were dirty words to me. Humility. Humility. What the hell was that? I had no idea. I thrived and ran on arrogance and brutality in my active alcoholism and addiction. I couldn't even spell humility. They'll even tell you what it meant. You know, these days I'm in with a shout of telling you what it might mean, but you know, I'm never going to describe myself as humble, because I think the man who describes himself as humble is probably anything but. You know, and there's the rub. You know, but I try to the best of my ability, and I'm self-critical in the constructive way that's talked about in step 11. And part of that process is by passing this on. You know, for a lot of people, the 12th step is it can be distilled down to stuff a lot more basic, like you know, service in meetings, or putting out chairs, or you know, opening up Zoom meetings and what have you. Listen, it's all helpful. Making cups of tea, it's great. It's all good stuff. But for me, the real stuff in step 12 is working with another alcoholic addict on a one-to-one basis, going through the work the way that somebody else did that for me. When I look at the time and the effort that other people have put in for me and my personal recovery, I'm now working with my 5th sponsor in 22 years. I've been through the program in slightly different ways with each one of them. It's the least I can do to make sure that I am here ready and able and willing to do that with the next Tim who comes into a 12-step meeting looking for a solution to this terrible, terrible illness. You know, it's a shocker, man. It's the one, zero sympathy out there. You know, it talks about that in the book. You know, if I'm a cancer sufferer, I can get, you know, quite a lot of sympathy. I tell you what, I've had 2 near fatal heart attacks, and both of them, you know, people are rallied round. Wow, it's incredible. You know, the amount of sympathy, love, and compassion you'll get. 2001, the only place I was going to find any love or compassion for my active alcoholism and addiction was around and with people who were working this 12-step program. No one else got it. No one else got it. And that for me is the significance of working that 12th step. I have my own personal experience of living in active alcoholism and addiction. If I can impart that and the seriousness of the problem as set out in the book to another human being, and then bring them through the work, I get the reward, and it is phenomenal. It's the kind of thing I used to sit and actually poo-poo at in meetings in that first difficult phase of my recovery, to see somebody else recover as a result of the information in the book and the actions that can be taken, the connection that they make with their higher power. To see them recover is an extraordinary thing. And then to see them pass that on to somebody else, and to then see that person in turn pass the message on to somebody else. I consider myself privileged and blessed that I have personally witnessed that in my own recovery. And I'm enormously grateful to the people that came before me in the world of 12-step recovery, the people that helped me, that taught me and encouraged me to do what they have done, and to see other people get lit up and pass it on is still the most incredible experience of my life. It was the most valued thing I had on the gurney in 2012. It was also the most valued thing I had in my life in 2017, when I was unlucky enough to have a second near fatal heart attack caused by the first. When I came round in the CCU after that second heart attack, there was a dear, dear friend of mine sat there with his written inventory, praying that I survived so that he could do his step 5 with me. And that kept me alive. I had little else to live for at that point, but the fact that that guy was sat there going, come on, Tim, make it through this, because I need to do this stuff and I want to do it with you. You cannot put a price on that. And it's those kind of thoughts and memories that I take to my grave. As I go to that grave gracefully, still always an addict and an alcoholic, but walking eventually to my destination under my own steam, rather than being dragged there by this horrific illness, which is always there waiting for me. If I lose that connection with my higher power and I fall for that insane idea that I can drink or use again, and I trigger off that allergy by picking up another drink. My name's Tim. I am an alcoholic and an addict, and I feel blessed to have had the opportunity to share with you today on my 22nd anniversary. But as I've explained, probably only 10, 11 of those years are really worth talking about. It's been a wonderful privilege. I'm very, very grateful to you all, and I wish you all the very best in your personal journeys. Thank you.